The morning I arrived at Veldenmoor, the earth smelled like old iron and rain. I had requested this assignment myself. That fact mattered, though I told no one why. The university's archaeology department had listed it as a minor excavation, a forgotten settlement in the Northern Highlands, possibly pre-unification era, of moderate academic interest. My colleagues had yawned when I presented the proposal. Dr. Kalen Voss, chair of Ancient Lupin Civilizations, wanted to dig up a ruin that nobody cared about in a valley that nobody visited. They approved it because nobody else wanted it. That was exactly what I needed. I parked my truck at the base of the valley road and sat for a long moment with both hands on the steering wheel, looking at the hills. They were green and gray and ancient, folded against each other like sleeping giants. The settlement ruins were invisible from here, buried under 6 centuries of grass and sediment, but I knew exactly where they were. I had known since I was 19 years old, standing on this same ridge in a different life, watching my kingdom burn. I was not Dr. Kalen Voss then. I had a different name, a different title, a different everything. I opened the truck door and stepped out into the highland air, and I told myself what I always told myself when the memories surfaced. That man is dead. You buried him. Stay buried. I had been telling myself that for 22 years. Some days I almost believed it. The excavation team arrived the following morning, 3 graduate students, a surveyor named Hadwick who complained about his knees, and a university photographer who spent most of her time looking at her phone. I set them to work on the eastern quadrant, which I had marked as the probable location of the old settlement's granary. It was important work. It was also work that would keep them far away from the western ridge. The western ridge was mine. I told them the western sector was unstable subsidence risk, possibly old tunnels beneath. They accepted this without question. Dr. Voss was known for caution. Dr. Voss was known for many things: precision, thoroughness, a slight coldness in his manner that students found intimidating but respected. Dr. Voss published excellent papers and attended faculty meetings, and occasionally smiled at departmental parties in a way that suggested he had once learned how to smile from a textbook. Nobody found Dr. Voss suspicious. He was simply a serious man who loved dead civilizations. The irony was not lost on me. I was on the western ridge by 6 in the morning, before the team arrived, working alone with a hand trowel and a flat brush, and the particular focused patience of a man who is afraid of what he might find. The sediment here was different from the eastern quadrant, darker, more compressed, layered in a way that spoke of deliberate burial rather than natural accumulation. Someone had filled this in carefully. Someone who knew what was here and wanted it to stay hidden. Me, 22 years ago, with borrowed hands and a broken heart, and the desperate conviction that if I buried it deep enough, it would cease to exist. I had been wrong about many things in my life. That had been one of the larger ones. By the 3rd morning, I had cleared 18 inches of sediment from a section roughly 4 meters square. The outline of the old throne room floor was beginning to emerge, dark stone, hand-fitted, still level after 6 centuries. I photographed everything methodically. I logged every find: fragments of ceremonial pottery, a corroded iron bracket that had once held a wall torch, 3 copper coins from the pre-unification minting that I recognized without needing to consult my reference charts. I had held those coins before, in my palm, warm from a treasury fire. On the 4th morning, I found the first bone. It was a finger bone, I thought initially, small, delicate, half buried in the corner of what had been the eastern antechamber. I cleaned it carefully and held it to the light and felt the familiar sick weight settle into my chest. Not a finger bone, a toe bone from something smaller than a human. A child's, perhaps, or I set it down and looked away and breathed through my nose for a long moment. A wolf pups. There had been pups in the throne room the night everything ended. I remembered that. I had not wanted to remember it, but memory is not obedient. It surfaces when it chooses and submerges when it pleases and pays no attention whatsoever to what we need it to do. I was still crouched over that small bone, very still, when I heard footsteps behind me. She moved quietly for someone who hadn't expected to encounter anyone. I knew she was there before she spoke. I had known the moment she crossed onto the ridge, because 22 years of scholarly discipline had not erased 22 years before that of something older and less civilized. My senses were not what they had once been. I had worked hard to mute them, to press them down under layers of academic routine and enforced normalcy. But they were not gone. They simply slept lightly. She smelled like pine resin and cold water, and something underneath both of those things that made every suppressed instinct in my body sit up straight and pay attention. I stood slowly and turned around. She was standing at the edge of the excavation perimeter, maybe 8 meters away, watching me with an expression that was carefully, professionally neutral. She wore hiking clothes, dark green jacket, worn boots, her dark hair pulled back from a face that was angular and watchful and entirely too perceptive. She carried no visible weapon, which meant nothing. She carried herself like someone who didn't need one. "Dr. Voss," she said, her voice was even, controlled. "Yes," I said. "I'm Sierra Blackwood, Thornville PAC, Highland Security Division." She held up an identification badge, standard regional authority, PAC-sanctioned, legitimate. "We received a notification that there's an active excavation in this sector. PAC elders want a liaison present for any digs in the Highland territories. Standard protocol." "I filed all the appropriate permits," I said. My voice was equally even. I was good at even. "I know, I reviewed them." She looked past me at the excavation grid, at the exposed stone floor, at the careful brushwork along the edges. Impressive work for one person. "I have a team. They're on the eastern quadrant." "But you work this section alone." It wasn't a question. I looked at her for a moment, measuring. Thornville PAC. The name snagged on something old and deep. Thornville had been a border PAC in the old territories. A warrior PAC, fiercely independent, famously unwilling to pledge loyalty to any central authority. They had been, in my other life, a particular kind of headache. They had also, if my fractured historical memory served, lost a great deal in the wars that followed the collapse of the Old Kingdom. My kingdom. "The Western sector has specific research value to me personally," I said. "I prefer to work it alone." "What kind of research value?" "Academic." She looked at me steadily. She had gray eyes, pale, almost silver, with a quality of seeing through things that I associated with old PAC bloodlines. The kind of eyes that had been bred for assessment across generations of necessity. "Right," she said, in a tone that indicated she found the word academic moderately unconvincing. "I'll set up a base camp at the perimeter. PAC protocol requires a daily check-in while the dig is active." "That's fine," I said. She nodded once, turned, and walked back toward the valley road with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had already decided something, but wasn't ready to say what it was. I stood and watched her go and felt the fated mate bond. That thing I had spent 22 years pretending didn't exist. Since the last time I had felt a whisper of it and run, settle into my chest like a key turning in a lock I had forgotten was there. Wonderful, I thought, with the exhausted resignation of a man who has successfully avoided every difficult thing for 2 decades and has just run directly into the most difficult thing of all. Absolutely wonderful. She came every morning at 7 and every evening at 5. She was punctual the way soldiers are punctual, not from enthusiasm but from discipline. She would appear at the ridge perimeter, note the day's progress in a small leather journal, ask 2 or 3 precise questions, and leave. The questions were always ostensibly about site safety or PAC territorial concerns. They were also, I noticed, always questions that revealed something about what I was finding. She was not just a liaison, she was an investigator. This would have worried me more if I had not been spending most of my mental energy managing the bond. It was stronger than I had expected. 22 years ago, when I had first felt it, a flicker, a suggestion, nothing like the full recognition, I had been in the middle of a war council, and I had put it aside with the ruthless practicality of a king who had 17 more pressing problems. Then the kingdom had fallen and I had stopped being a king, and the flicker had gone dormant, buried under grief and guilt and the careful construction of a new self. But dormant was not dead. Proximity was doing something to it. Every morning when she appeared at the perimeter, every evening when she noted her observations in that small leather journal, the bond pulled tighter. Not painfully, not yet, but with an insistence that was difficult to ignore. Like a sound at the edge of hearing that you keep trying not to notice, and keep noticing anyway. I was lecturing my team on the Eastern Quadrant findings, a preserved section of floor mosaic, beautifully intact, depicting hunting scenes in the old Highland style, when she arrived on the 5th morning. She stood at the edge of the group and listened. I was explaining the iconography, the wolf figures in the border panels, the significance of the central stag motif, the way the artisan had used lapis and malachite to distinguish pack ranks in the hunting party, when I made the mistake of looking at her. She was not watching the mosaic, she was watching me. Specifically, she was watching the way I talked about the iconography, the fluency of it, the lack of hesitation. Scholars who specialize in a period develop a certain familiarity with their material, a comfort, but there is always the slight texture of learned knowledge, the occasional micropause of someone consulting internal references. I had none of that. I was not describing this mosaic the way a scholar describes something studied. I was describing it the way you describe your own living room. She saw it, I could tell she saw it. I wrapped up the lecture 10 minutes early, citing light conditions, and retreated to the western ridge before she could ask questions. On the 7th day, I hit metal. I had been working the southwestern corner of the throne room for 3 days, moving with deliberately careful slowness, because I had known all along, that what I was looking for was there. But knowing and encountering are different things. You can know something intellectually for 22 years and still be completely unprepared for the weight of it when it becomes real. The trowel struck something at 31 inches depth. The sound was different from stone, a dense, full ring, the sound of serious metal under serious pressure. My hand stopped moving of its own accord. I knelt there for a moment without doing anything, listening to the silence of the ridge and the distant sound of the team working the eastern quadrant and the wind moving through the highland grass. Then I set down the trowel and picked up the brush and began to clear. It took 2 hours of careful work. The box emerged slowly, dark wood, iron-banded, sealed with a mechanism I had designed myself. Not large, roughly the size of a document chest. The wood had survived remarkably well. I had used treated timber and dense packing, and the soil here was dry. I lifted it with both hands and set it on the cleared stone beside me and looked at it. I had not seen it in 22 years. I had carried it here myself in the dark, 3 days after the fall, with everything burning behind me, with the sounds of a kingdom ending still in my ears. I had dug this hole and laid this box in it and covered it over and walked away and told myself I was walking away from everything it contained. The mechanism opened at my touch. My hands remembered the sequence without my mind needing to engage. 3 turns, 2 presses, lift. The lid came up. The crown sat on a bed of oiled cloth that had kept it almost perfectly preserved. It was not an elaborate thing. I had never been an elaborate king, which had perhaps been part of the problem. Hammered gold, a single circlet, set with 3 dark stones at the front. Onyx, not diamonds. I had chosen onyx because diamonds were for kings who wanted to be admired, and onyx was for kings who wanted to be respected. And I had been young and idealistic and entirely confident that I understood the difference. I understood the difference now. I understood it had not mattered in the end. I reached into the box and lifted the crown out. It was heavy. It had always been heavy. Not in weight, it weighed perhaps 300 grams, but in the way that objects absorb what happens around them, the gravity of events soaking into gold and stone over centuries. I held it in both hands and looked at it. It still fit, I knew, without trying it. I knew the shape of it, the weight distribution, the precise way it settled on a skull it had been made for. I had worn it for 6 years. 6 years of trying to be worthy of 300 grams of hammered gold and 3 pieces of onyx, and failing in the specific way that idealistic young kings fail. Not from cruelty, but from certainty. Not from weakness, but from a conviction that I knew better than the accumulated wisdom of the people I was supposed to serve. "What is that?" I did not startle. I had heard her cross onto the ridge 4 minutes ago. I turned around slowly, the crown still in my hands, and looked at Sierra Blackwood standing at the edge of the excavation. She was not looking at the crown. She was looking at my face. I had a prepared answer. I had prepared it 3 weeks ago, before I ever arrived in Veldenmoor, because I am a thorough man and I had known this moment was possible. The answer was detailed and academically plausible and completely false. A ceremonial piece, likely belonging to a regional chieftain of the late pre-unification era, consistent with metallurgical practices of the period, significant find, very exciting, would need to be logged and transported to the university for proper analysis. I opened my mouth to deliver this answer. She spoke first. "That's the crown of Veldenmoor," she said. Her voice was quiet, certain. "From the old kingdom, the one that fell during the Sundering Wars." The prepared answer evaporated. "You know your history," I said. "Thornville Pack lost 400 wolves in those wars." Her eyes moved from my face to the crown and back again. "We know our history." I looked down at the crown in my hands. 300 grams, 3 onyx stones, 6 years. "It's a significant find," I said. "You're not surprised by it. Archaeologists are trained too." "You're not surprised," she said again, and her voice had changed, still controlled, but with something underneath it now, something pressing against the control from the inside. "You knew it was there. You came here knowing exactly what you would find, and you've been working this section alone for a week to make sure no one else was present when you found it." The silence on the ridge was complete except for the wind. "Dr. Voss," she said carefully, "how do you know the crown of Veldenmoor fits on your head?" I realized I was holding it in the exact position of a man about to put it on. Both hands, level, the natural posture of someone who has performed this action so many times it has become physical memory. I lowered my hands. "Sierra," I said. It was the first time I had used her name. I watched something flicker in her eyes at the sound of it, not surprise exactly, but a recognition, a resonance. She felt it too. Of course she felt it. She was Pack-born. She had been bred for this sensitivity. She would have been feeling it all week and filing it under inexplicable, and not my problem, and focus on the investigation. "How much do you know about the last king of Veldenmoor?" "Enough," she said. "He was young, came to power at 19, ruled for 6 years. His pack called him Kalen the Iron, not because he was cruel, but because he wouldn't bend. He had absolute certainty in his own judgments, refused to delegate authority, made 3 catastrophic decisions in the final year of his reign that collapsed the alliance structure holding the Highland packs together." Her voice was recitative, memorized history, pack oral tradition. "When the Sundering Wars ended, the kingdom was gone. Kalen the Iron disappeared. Some histories say he died in the final battle. Others say he survived and fled." She paused. "The Thornville elders always believed he survived." "Why?" "Because his body was never found, and because the crown was never found, and because—" She stopped. "Because," I said. "Because there are old stories," she said quietly. "Pack legends. about fated mate bonds that span decades, about wolves who find their mates long after they should have because the bond waited. She looked at me steadily. The elders always said the last king of Valdenmoor had an unfinished bond, that somewhere his mate was waiting without knowing why she was waiting. The wind moved through the highland grass. Somewhere on the eastern quadrant, I could faintly hear Hadwick complaining about his knees. 22 years, I said. 22 years, she agreed. I looked at her, really looked at her, with the part of myself I kept locked in a cellar beneath 17 layers of academic restraint. And the bond pulled taut and rang like a struck bell, clear and irreversible and absolutely certain. The kingdom fell because of me, I said, not because of the wars. The wars were the consequence. The cause was me, my certainty, my refusal to listen, my conviction that I understood things I didn't understand. 400 wolves from your pack. I know the number. I knew it then. I have known it every day for 22 years. And so you became someone else. I became someone who couldn't hurt anyone. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Did it work?" I looked at the crown in my hands. "No," I said. She didn't report it, not that day. I knew she was considering it. She had a duty to her pack, to the Highland Authority, to the protocols that governed excavations in territorial land. The crown of Valdenmoor was, by any legal standard, a significant historical artifact that belonged in the custody of the regional council. The man who had buried it and then excavated it under a false identity was, by any reasonable assessment, someone who warranted official attention. She could have ended everything that afternoon, made one call, brought the weight of pack authority down on a ridge in the Valdenmoor Highlands, and unraveled 22 years of careful reinvention in about 40 minutes. She went back to her perimeter camp and ate a cold dinner, and wrote in her small leather journal until the light failed. I watched her camp from the ridge. I was not proud of this. I was also unable to stop. This was the thing about the bond that they don't tell you when you're young, when it's new and theoretical, and you understand it as an idea rather than a force. They tell you it's a gift. They tell you it's the deepest recognition one wolf can have of another, the alignment of two natures that were always meant to complete each other. They tell you it's beautiful. They don't tell you that it makes you profoundly stupid. I was a man who had spent 22 years becoming someone rational and disciplined, and governed entirely by intellect. And in 8 days of watching Sierra Blackwood write in a leather journal and ask precise questions, and see through everything I said, all of that careful construction had developed significant structural cracks. I went to her camp at 9 o'clock. She was still awake, sitting by a small fire, journal closed, looking into the flames with the expression of someone conducting an internal argument and losing both sides of it. She looked up when I appeared at the edge of the firelight, and she did not look surprised. "I wondered when you'd come," she said. I sat down across the fire from her. The flames were between us, which felt appropriate. "I need to tell you the truth," I said. "Before you decide what to do, you should have the complete truth." "I have most of it," she said. "You have the facts. The facts aren't the whole truth." She considered this. Then she said, "All right." So I told her. I had not told anyone in 22 years. Not a fragment, not an implication, not a hint. Dr. Kalen Voss had no past worth mentioning, a childhood in the southern lowlands, a scholarship to the university, a quiet academic life. He had no pack, no territory, no history before the age of 22. He was a clean slate that I had written very carefully. But I told Sierra Blackwood everything. I told her about coming to power at 19, young and convinced, and completely wrong about the nature of conviction. About the alliance with the lowland packs that I had structured as subordination rather than partnership, because I had genuinely believed that centralized authority was more efficient than distributed power, and I had been correct about the efficiency and catastrophically wrong about everything else. About the 3 decisions in the final year, the resource levy, the border realignment, the dissolution of the traditional pack councils, that had each seemed individually logical and had together lit a fire that consumed everything. I told her about the Thornville engagement in the 2nd year of the Sundering Wars, 400 wolves. I had ordered in advance that my field commanders had advised against, and I had been certain they were wrong, and I had been wrong, and 400 Thornville wolves had died in a valley not 20 kilometers from where we were sitting. I told her about the night of the fall, about walking through the throne room one last time, picking up the crown, carrying it to the ridge, about digging the hole with my own hands and laying the box in it and covering it over, about the walk south, which had taken 6 weeks, during which I had shed everything I was, the authority, the certainty, the name, the identity, like a snake shedding a skin, except that snakes grow new skins and I had chosen not to. About finding the university. About building Dr. Voss, carefully, methodically, from the ground up. A man who studied dead civilizations because he had been part of one. A man who lectured on the failures of centralized authority because he had embodied them. A man who had made himself an expert in everything he had done wrong, because it was the only penance he could think of that didn't require dying. The fire burned low while I talked. She didn't interrupt. She sat with her knees drawn up and her journal in her lap and listened with the complete attention of someone who understands that some things need to be said without interruption. When I finished, the fire was almost out. "The papers you've published," she said, "the ones on the collapse of the Highland Kingdom Pack Alliance system, the ones on the structural failures of centralized authority in multi-pack territories." "Yes. Those aren't academic papers." "No," I said, "they're confessions." She was quiet for a long moment. "My grandmother died in the Thornville engagement," she said. "She was 43, a senior warrior. Her name was Myra Blackwood." She looked at me across the dying fire, and her expression was not what I had expected, not rage, not grief, not the cold judgment I had rehearsed receiving for 22 years. It was something more complicated than any of those things. She had 7 grandchildren. I'm the youngest. "I know I cannot." "I'm not finished," she said. I stopped. "My grandmother was a warrior," she said. "She knew the risks of every engagement she ever fought. She made her own choices. The pack made its own choices. Thornville was not a passive party in the Sundering Wars. We had our own reasons and our own grievances and our own decisions that led to that valley." She paused. "I'm not telling you her death wasn't partly a consequence of your choices. It was. I'm telling you it wasn't only that. History is not a chain with one link." "That's a generous interpretation," I said. "It's an accurate one." She looked at me steadily. "The Thornville elders spend a great deal of time arguing about who was responsible for the Sundering Wars. They have been arguing about it for 22 years. It is a very complex argument with many valid positions." A pause. "The dominant consensus, for what it's worth, is that the system failed, not one king. The whole system, the alliance structures, the power imbalances, the lack of legitimate dispute mechanisms, the fact that too much authority was concentrated in too few hands with too little accountability. Your decisions were a catalyst. They were not the disease." I looked at her. "Your elders are more generous than I am," I said. "My elders are very old and very tired of being angry," she said. "Anger is exhausting when you sustain it for 22 years." There was a long silence. The fire was coals now, red-orange in the dark. "The bond," I said. "Yes," she said. "I felt it 22 years ago, a flicker, during a war council meeting. I put it aside because I had more urgent problems. That was probably my grandmother's pack visiting for the preliminary negotiations," she said, with a dry edge. "I was 6. I came with her." I stared at her. "You were 6 years old," I said. "The bond doesn't care about timing," she said. "Everyone knows this. It finds what it finds when it finds it, and then it waits. She looked at me with those gray eyes, pale and direct in the firelight. It waited 22 years. I don't have a kingdom, I said. I don't have a pack. I don't have a title or territory or any of the things that. I know what you have, she said. I've been watching you work for 8 days. I know exactly what you have. What do I have? She was quiet for a moment. You have the most thorough understanding of failure I've ever encountered in a living person, she said. You have 22 years of learning what not to do, which is more valuable than most leaders' understanding of what to do. You have the specific humility of someone who was certain once and paid the full price for it. She paused. And you have a fated mate bond with a Thornville she-wolf who is going to have a very interesting conversation with her elders when she goes home. They'll want me to answer for. They'll want to meet the man who wrote those papers, she said. I've read them, Kaelin. The elders have read them. You think you've been hiding, but you've been broadcasting your exact location to anyone who knew where to look. I sat with that for a moment. Nobody looked, I said. I looked, she said. 3 years ago. I found the papers and I read every single one and I brought them to the elders and I said, I think this is him. And the elders said probably yes. And I said, what do we do? And Elder Ryan, she's 94, she was a young warrior in the Sundering Wars. She lost 2 sisters, she said. We wait. Let him finish burying himself and then let him dig himself up. Some men need to find their own way out. The night was very quiet around us. She sounds formidable, I said. She's absolutely terrifying, Sira said. You'll meet her eventually. She'll probably say something that makes you feel like a bad thesis student. Eventually, the word carried weight. You've already decided, I said. I decided 4 days ago, she said, probably earlier. We worked together in the mornings. This was her suggestion, delivered the following day with characteristic directness. She would assist with the Western Sector documentation, which would ensure proper pack territory oversight and also, incidentally, allow me to work faster. I accepted. I told myself this was practical. It was not practical. It was the bond and we both knew it, and neither of us said so. She was a careful, precise excavation assistant. She had no formal training, but she had the patient, methodical quality of someone accustomed to careful observation, and she learned the brush technique quickly. We worked in a companionable silence that was unlike any silence I had experienced in 22 years of Dr. Voss's carefully maintained solitude. This silence had another person in it. It had warmth. I had forgotten or suppressed or deliberately buried. I could not be certain which. What it felt like to have another person present in a way that didn't require the constant maintenance of performance. Dr. Voss was always performing. Even alone, he was performing, because he never knew when the performance might be required and it was safer to maintain it continuously. With Sira, the performance kept slipping. I would say something entirely natural, and then notice I had said it. And then notice she was looking at me with the slight amused expression of someone watching a very reserved person accidentally be themselves. You just described that mosaic fragment like you were correcting a student, she said, on the 3rd morning of working together. I did not. You said no, look at the border pattern, that's what tells you the date range, not the central motif. People always look at the wrong thing first. That's accurate information. It's the way you said it. She was brushing sediment from a section of carved wall panel. You said it like someone who's explained it 100 times and is mildly exasperated that people keep missing the obvious thing. Academics develop a pedagogical tone. Well, she said, in the tone of someone who finds this explanation moderately unconvincing. Again. I looked at her. She was not looking at me. She was focused on the wall panel, working a particularly stubborn deposit of compressed clay with careful strokes. The morning light was good on the ridge, clear and cold, the kind of highland light that makes everything slightly more real than it usually is. I miss teaching, I said. This was true, and I had not known it was true until I said it. Not the academic politics, not the departmental meetings, but the moment when someone understands something they didn't understand before, when you see it happen, the precise moment of comprehension. That's why you're good at it, she said. Am I? Your students find you intimidating, but they remember everything you teach them. She looked up at me briefly. I asked one of your graduate students while you were in the Eastern Quadrant. I stared at her. You investigated my graduate students. I'm a PAC liaison officer conducting territorial oversight, she said, returning to the wall panel. Investigation is implied. What else did you investigate? Your publication record, your university personnel file. I have a contact in administrative records before you ask. Your conference appearances over the past decade. Your research funding sources. A pause. Your apartment in the university district, though that was less investigation and more your graduate students volunteering that you have no personal photographs anywhere, and that your bookshelves are organized in a way that suggests mild anxiety about disorder. That is a significant invasion of. You buried a crown on PAC territory and excavated it under a false identity, she said pleasantly. My threshold for what constitutes a proportionate investigation is perhaps slightly higher than yours. I sat back on my heels and looked at her. Fair, I said. She almost smiled. The full excavation of the throne room took 11 days. It emerged piece by piece, the floor complete, the wall panels mostly intact, the remains of the throne dais visible in the northeastern corner. The team worked the Eastern Quadrant and found excellent things and were pleased with themselves, which meant they did not pay close attention to what was happening on the Western Ridge. What was happening on the Western Ridge was that I was excavating my own past, carefully, layer by layer, and Sierra Blackwood was sitting next to me while I did it. Not literally, though sometimes literally, when the work was slow, and she had finished her documentation and would sit on a section of cleared stone and read, or write in her journal, or simply be present in the quietly companionable way that she seemed capable of sustaining indefinitely. But the real excavation was the conversations, the things that surfaced in the spaces between work, over lunch, walking the ridge perimeter in the evenings, sitting by her campfire after the team had gone to sleep. She asked questions, not interrogation. She had clearly decided the interrogation phase was complete, but the genuine curiosity of someone who wants to understand rather than judge. What had I done with myself in the years between the fall and the university? What had it felt like to build a new identity from the beginning? Was it liberating, or was it loss, or both? What had I discovered, in 22 years of studying the civilization I had once governed, that I hadn't understood when I was inside it? That last question kept me talking for an entire evening. Everything looks different from outside it, I said. That's the obvious answer, and it's also completely true. But what I didn't expect, what I couldn't have predicted, was that the distance would make it more painful, not less. I thought if I studied it like a scholar, it would become abstract, historical, something that happened to other people a long time ago. I looked at the fire. It never became abstract. Every paper I wrote, every lecture I gave, I was still in it. Still in the throne room at 19, still in the War Council, still in the valley where Thornville. I stopped. Say it, she said quietly. Still in the valley where Thornville lost 400 wolves, because I ordered in advance that I was certain was correct. And now, she said, now I know I was wrong. I knew it within a week. Within a week I knew exactly why it had failed and what I should have done instead, and that knowledge has been available to me every day since, and it does not help. No, she said, it wouldn't. The papers help, I said. Slightly. The idea that someone might read them and avoid that the analysis might be useful to someone who has to make similar decisions without my particular biography of mistakes. They are useful, she said. The Thornville elders use the third paper in the governance training for young PAC leaders, have for 15 years. I looked at her. They use my paper. The one on distributed authority structures and the failure modes of centralized pack governance. She met my eyes. They don't know who wrote it. Elder Ryan suspects. She reads everything, and she has a very good memory for rhetorical patterns. A pause. She said once that whoever wrote it must have been either a very good historian or a very guilty king. Something moved in my chest, not the bond, which I had grown somewhat accustomed to in the past 2 weeks, but something older and less nameable. The particular sensation of being seen in a way you've been hiding from. What did the other elders say? I asked. Elder Tomas said probably both. She looked at the fire. He's 91. He fought in the Sundering Wars on the Thornville side. He lost his brother in the valley. She was quiet for a moment. He also said that a guilty king who spends 20 years trying to understand what he did wrong is more useful to the living than a dead hero who never got the chance. The Highland wind moved through the grass. I don't deserve that generosity, I said. What you deserve and what you're given aren't always the same thing, she said. That goes in both directions. The Thornville Pack didn't deserve the Sundering Wars. They were given them anyway. You don't deserve forgiveness you haven't earned. Some of them are giving it anyway because they're old and they understand that accounting for the past is less useful than building something from what's left. I was quiet. And you, I said, what are you giving? She looked at me for a long moment. I'm sitting by a fire on a highland ridge with a man who carries 22 years of guilt the way some people carry a second skeleton, she said. Figure it out. The excavation was formally complete on the 14th day. I filed the team's reports, genuine academic work, solid findings. The Eastern Quadrant mosaic alone would generate 3 publishable papers, and sent them back to the university ahead of schedule. Hadwick's knees were grateful. The photographer had gotten excellent material. The graduate students were flushed with the particular excitement of people who have done good work and know it. They left on a Thursday morning. Hadwick shook my hand and said it had been a privilege. The graduate students filed past with their bags, and their enthusiasm, and their complete unawareness of what had been happening 40 meters west of them for 2 weeks. Then it was just Sierra and me on the ridge, and the exposed stone of the old throne room floor, and the box in my tent that contained the crown. What are you going to do with it? She asked. We were sitting on the cleared throne room floor. She had produced a thermos of coffee from somewhere, and was sharing it with the easy competence of someone who plans for cold ridges. The sun was out properly for the first time all week, and the Highland Valley spread below us in autumn green and gold. I don't know yet, I said honestly. You have options, she said. You could donate it to the Regional Heritage Authority. Legitimate provenance, significant historical find, proper institutional custody. Yes. You could give it to the Thornville Council as a formal acknowledgement of whatever it would be an acknowledgement of. They'd know what to do with it. Yes. Or you could keep it. She looked at me sideways. Not wear it, just keep it. Some things you carry because you need to know you can. I thought about this. When I buried it, I said, I believed I was putting it down, setting down the weight of it. I thought if I put it in the ground, I could walk away from what it meant. And I carried it the whole time, I said. Every day for 22 years in a hole in the ground 32 inches deep. It was heavier than it was in my hands. She nodded slowly. That's the thing about weight, she said. You can redistribute it, but you can't leave it behind. It goes where you go, in one form or another. I looked out over the valley. The autumn light was very clear. I want to go to Thornville, I said. If the elders are willing to receive me, not to answer for anything, I understand that the accounting is something I do privately, that there is no formal tribunal that will resolve this. But to say it, to the people it happened to, not in a paper that they read without knowing who wrote it, to say it in person. Elder Ryan will make you feel like a bad thesis student, Sira said. I suspect I was a bad thesis student, I said, in the broadest sense. She looked at me. Something shifted in her expression. The professional neutrality she had maintained with varying success for 2 weeks, settling into something simpler and more direct. The bond, she said. Yes, I said. I need you to understand something about me, she said. I'm not interested in a king. I'm not interested in a title or a throne or any of it. I'm a Highland security officer with a pack I'm loyal to and a grandmother I never knew and 22 years of my own history that's complicated in its own ways. She looked at me steadily. I'm interested in the man who wrote those papers. The man who thinks very fast and talks like a professor and handles a trowel like someone who learned 30 years ago and still has the muscle memory. The man who sat on this ridge in the dark and told me the truth when he didn't have to. That man doesn't have much to offer, I said. He has everything I just listed, she said, which is more than most. I looked at her, the angular, watchful face, the gray eyes, the quality of absolute directness that I had found unsettling for 2 weeks and had now begun, inexplicably, to find the most restful thing about my days. The bond waited 22 years, I said. Yes. I spent 22 years becoming someone different from who I was. You spent 22 years becoming someone better, she said. There's a difference. The Highland wind moved through the grass. Below us, the valley was gold and green in the autumn light. I would like to meet Elder Ryan, I said. She'll like you, Sira said. She has no patience for people who are certain about things. You've completely cured yourself of certainty. Not completely, I said. She looked at me. Almost, I said. I'm almost certain about one thing. She held my gaze for a long moment. Then she looked away at the valley, at the old throne room floor exposed around us, at the autumn hills of Veldenmoor. Almost is enough to start with, she said. Elder Ryan was 94 years old and approximately 5 feet tall, and had the quality of a very old and very sharp blade, refined past the point where size is relevant, dangerous in exact proportion to how much you underestimate her. She received me in the Thornville Council Hall 3 weeks after the excavation closed, seated in a high-backed chair by a fire that was clearly too hot for everyone except her. Sira sat to my left. 8 other elders flanked Ryan's chair, ranging in age from 60 to what I estimated was very old indeed. I had brought the crown. I set it on the table between us without preamble, because I had given up preamble somewhere on the Highland Ridge, and I found I didn't miss it. I know who you are, Elder Ryan said before I could speak. Her voice was thin but precise, like a line drawn with a fine instrument. You write in the third person when you're describing your own decisions. It's a habit I've noticed across 6 papers. I'm aware, I said. It's a tell, she said. Any good editor would have caught it. The fact that your editors didn't suggests they had no idea what they were reading. They didn't, I said. She looked at the crown on the table between us for a long moment. Then she looked at me. My sister fought in the valley, she said. Not the one who died, the one who survived. She's been dead for 12 years now, outlived the war by 51 years, which says something about her specifically. Before she died, she told me something about that engagement. She stopped. What did she tell you? I said. She said the wolves who died in that valley died well, Elder Ryan said. She said that was something, not everything, but something. She paused. She also said that if she ever met the king who ordered that advance, she would ask him one question. What question? Ryan looked at me with eyes that had seen 94 years of history, and had not softened 1 degree in the accumulation. Did you learn? She said. The fire crackled. The council hall was very quiet. Yes, I said. Not fast enough, not thoroughly enough. Not in time for it to help anyone who needed it, but yes, I spent 22 years learning, I'm still learning. She looked at me for a long moment. Then my sister would have said, "Sit down and stop hovering," Ryan said. "You're making the room feel anxious." I sat down. Sierra to my left made a very small sound that might, in someone less controlled, have been a laugh. We did not take the crown back. It remained with the Thornville elders, locked in the council archive alongside the other artifacts of the Sundering Wars, a collection the pack maintained not as trophies but as a form of witnessing. This happened. These were the things that were present when it happened. We keep them so the fact of it persists. I returned to the university and filed my excavation reports and taught my autumn seminar on Highland Pack governance structures in the pre-unification era. And my students found me slightly different than before, slightly less defended, slightly more present, without being able to identify what had changed. One of the graduate students who had been on the excavation told a colleague that Dr. Voss seemed almost like a person now, which she meant as a compliment. Sierra came to the university city 3 weeks after the Thornville meeting. She did not announce the visit. She appeared in the doorway of my office on a Tuesday afternoon with her pack jacket and her leather journal and the expression of someone who has made a decision and is comfortable with it. "I put in for a transfer," she said. "Highland Security has a district office here. I've been offered a position." I looked at her from across the desk covered in site photographs and excavation notes, and 3 empty coffee cups that I had meant to throw away. "That's a significant decision," I said. "I've been thinking about it for 3 weeks," she said. "I'm not impulsive." "No," I agreed, "you're not." "Neither are you anymore," she said. Which is either reassuring or means we'll never actually make any decisions. "I'm almost certain we'll manage," I said. She looked at me. The slight amused expression that had been surfacing for the past 3 weeks, the one that appeared when I accidentally was myself, surfaced again. "Still almost," she said. "Still learning," I said. She walked across the office and moved one of the empty coffee cups aside and sat on the edge of the desk, which was entirely unprofessional for both of us, and neither of us mentioned it, and looked at the site photograph spread between us, the excavation grid, the throne room floor emerging from 6 centuries of sediment, the cleared stone in Highland light. "What are you going to do?" she said, "with 22 years of understanding what not to do?" "I'm already doing it," I said. "The papers, the teaching, I stopped. Thornville's governance training materials need updating. The 3rd paper is 12 years old and some of the structural analysis is out of date. I've been thinking about a revised edition." "Elder Ryan will want to be involved," Sierra said. "I've been expecting that," I said. She looked at me sideways. "You're not afraid of her," she said. It was slightly surprised. "She's exactly what I need," I said. "Someone who will tell me when I'm wrong before it costs 400 lives." I paused. "In an advisory capacity, with no crown involved." Sierra was quiet for a moment. "No crown," she agreed. "Just the work." "Just the work," I said, "and whatever this is." I looked at her. She looked at me. The bond, which had been patient for 22 years and had no intention of being dramatic about its resolution, settled quietly into the space between us like something that had always been there and had simply been waiting for both parties to stop running. "This," she said, "is us figuring it out. We've established I'm no longer certain about things," I said. "Good start," she said. Outside the office window, the university city went about its afternoon business, entirely unaware that a man who had once been a king and a woman who was the mate his bond had waited 22 years to find were sitting in a cluttered office on a Tuesday afternoon, beginning, carefully, imperfectly, with the specific patience of 2 people who understand what it costs to move too fast, to figure out what came next. It was not a throne room, it was not a kingdom. It was, for the first time in 22 years, enough.